So I studied teaching English at university, and I also taught English for quite a while. I thought I knew what was going on, but then I moved to Japan in 2016, and it completely changed everything I now know about learning a language. Let's talk about it. Hey up mate, and cheers for finding this video today. I appreciate that. If you're new around here, I'm Dan and I'm a British English teacher here to help you build your confidence when using English. Now today, I'm going to be sharing my story when I moved to Japan in 2016 and I suddenly was faced with the language barrier and having to learn Japanese, and it taught me something very, very important about how languages are learned and applied, and I want to share that with you today. So let's jump in. Learning a new language to live in a new country, it's bloody hard work, mate. Trust me, I know from experience how difficult it can get. Now, let me tell you a bit of background about me. So in 2016, that's me, stood on the balcony of Akashi Castle. So I moved from Sheffield in the UK over to Akashi in Japan. Now, if you've not heard of that, don't worry. I hadn't either when I moved here. I didn't know. I've heard of Tokyo, but I didn't really know anything else. But next minute, I arrive in Akashi, which is, it's kind of a coastal town famous for octopus. And it's got a very, very big bridge called the Akashi Kaikyo Ohashi, which is the Akashi Straits Bridge. But yeah, it's quite a small town. It's not far from Kobe. Maybe you've heard of Kobe beef before. Anyway, quite nice place. And of course, when you move to a new place, it's amazing. You know, everything's new. You know, every time I went in a shop, it was the first time I'd been in that shop. Every time I tried some food, it was like the first time I'd tried that food. Every time I did anything, it was a new experience. And it was totally different, and it was totally amazing, like absolutely amazing. Everything was so exciting. Or starting a new life. And honestly, one of the happiest times of my entire life, I think, that first month. Although it was tough, obviously, but it were really, really incredible feeling. And it's all well and good, but eventually that fades a little bit. And you're left with like the reality of the situation that you're in. You're in a country that doesn't speak your language. You're halfway across the world from everybody you know and love, and you're completely on your own. At least that's the situation I was in, right? So I fast realized that I'd encountered a problem with the language, to be honest. But I had learned some Japanese before I went. I bought some textbooks and apps and did a few lessons and things like this. So I knew what I thought were decent Japanese. I thought, oh yeah, I'll be fine. Well, spoiler alert, it didn't quite work out exactly like that, to be honest. But, you know, we'll get into it. Now, one of the big things was just how overwhelming it is to be faced with a language barrier that is so big and it just encompasses your entire life. Like everything is language barrier, like everything. No matter what you want to do, you're going to have to deal with a language, and that can be really difficult. And it's not just language barrier. There's so many like cultural differences that you have to try and understand. Like nobody explains cultural stuff, but then you've got to work it out when you get here. And like all this stuff goes into communicating effectively and confidently. And to be honest, I found it so difficult to get started with a language. Like I found I could ask for directions, but I couldn't understand what people were telling me. You know, and it were like just everything was so difficult. And daily tasks, things like going to the pharmacy because I needed to buy some, I don't know, medicine, just having to try and explain that. And it was so overwhelming. Like I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to do anything. I ended up being completely isolated and really, really lonely. If you've ever lived in another country on your own, you know how lonely the experience can be. And honestly, I wanted to go home. In that first 6 months, I nearly gave up and went home a few times. And I've fast become aware that these emotions and these problems are pretty much universal for anyone that moves to a new country. I work with loads of people that move to England, and they experience a lot of the same things. Like, what's easy for you in your own country is suddenly incredibly difficult, you know. And the language, the cultural aspects, the loneliness, it really gets on top of you. And I really struggled with that when I first arrived in Japan. And yeah, I took this photo probably after I've been in Japan about 6 months. And if you look at my face, you can see it. You can see I'm not happy. I mean, this place is called Fushimi Inami. It's Fushimi Inari, sorry. It's really famous in Kyoto. And I was miserable, just like straight up miserable. And it was because I was struggling so much with the language side of it, you know. I had learned some Japanese before I came here. I did buy some textbooks, which are on my shelf over there. And I took lessons for a while with a Japanese teacher in Sheffield. And I took lessons with her for a while, and I'd got apps and stuff. And I thought I'm going to be fine. But when I actually got here, I realized that all that stuff I'd studied was not the same Japanese as what I was hearing every day, you know. And for example, I really struggled because I moved to an area of Japan called Kansai. And Kansai people don't speak quote unquote standard Japanese. They don't speak Hyojungo, which is standard Japanese. They speak Kansai Ben, which is like a Kansai dialect, if you like. Kind of like people in Yorkshire speaking a Yorkshire dialect and a Yorkshire accent. Same thing, but Japanese, right? Now, they use loads of slang. They use loads of words I didn't know. Like, I'd learned words for like, ikura desu ka, which is how much, but they didn't say that. Like, nambo. And I was like, that's not even close to what I'd learned. And they speak really quick in Kansai. Like, they're really quick. They cut words out. They shorten everything. Like, they do their own thing. And it's really different. So I had learned one thing, thought, okay, I understand enough Japanese to survive, got to Kansai, and none of it was what I'd learned. None of it. So suddenly I felt like, oh, actually, I don't understand anybody. And your confidence just kind of goes, doo. You know, it drops off a cliff because you thought you'd be all right, but actually you're not. And yeah, understanding the fast speech and the colloquial dialect were almost impossible for me at first. So I often felt like left out because, you know, if I was in a conversation, I couldn't really contribute. I'd only got like survival Japanese. So I couldn't really express myself very well. And so I felt like I couldn't really take part in group conversations, you know, which adds to the loneliness of the whole thing. And, you know, like, of course, I tried to go about my daily life as much as I could. Made loads of mistakes. Absolutely loads. Some pretty embarrassing ones as well, to be honest. Quite a lot at first. I would go to the kombini, which is like your corner shop if you're in England. It's like 7-Eleven or whatever. And after they gave me all my stuff and the bag and whatever I'd bought, usually I would say thank you, which in Japanese is arigatou gozaimasu. Or azasu in Kansai. But I often got it mixed up with good morning, which is ohayo gozaimasu, arigatou gozaimasu, ohayo gozaimasu. And I often got them wrong. So I take all my stuff and be like, you know, good morning. I'm like, what are you talking about? And you get outside and you're like, oh, Christ, I got it wrong again. And it happened a lot. And, you know, I made a bunch of mistakes and just stupid things where you'd say the wrong word and look like an idiot. And all this kind of adds up, you know, the constant mistakes, the feeling like I couldn't understand anybody. I couldn't understand what people were saying to me. And I couldn't really express anything other than basic thoughts. It made you feel like scared of conversations. You know, it made me feel like conversations are too much for me right now. I need to take a step back. And that led me to a turning point. This photo of me is in a game center, which is like an arcade. I'm playing Street Fighter 4 probably. And I'm looking grumpy, so I probably lost that game. But if you're listening to the audio podcast, I've got photos on the screen, by the way. Anyway, so here I am in a game center. I'm reaching a turning point. I've been in Japan probably about a year at this point. And I realized I was doing the wrong things. I kind of went backwards in a way that didn't make sense. I was scared of conversations, but I wanted conversations. And what I did is I kind of stepped back and I thought, okay, well, if I can't handle conversations, I need to study the language more. I spent so much time on apps and textbooks and, just trying to memorize the language, word lists and grammar rules. And, that's how I always thought languages were learned. You have to learn the vocabulary, you have to learn the grammar, and then you can start to use it somehow. And it doesn't really work like that. So anyway, I'm using all these apps and I'm doing all this stuff, and artificially I feel like I'm making progress, but conversations didn't get any easier. And it kind of led me to realize I needed a new plan of attack, because I learned that grammar and vocabulary is important, but that's not going to help me understand the natives who are speaking too quickly for me. Textbook Japanese, like, excuse me, where is the station? Sumimasen, eki wa doko desu ka? Is not going to really help me make friends, And avoiding conversations and putting it off till a later date where I felt more comfortable was actually just holding me back. And yeah, I think at some point after about a year being in Japan, I realized, like, mate, this is not working. You need to try something new. And what I actually learned is that if I want to communicate with people, and that was my goal, I wanted to communicate with people, I wanted to make friends, I wanted to feel less lonely and stuff. Guess what? You actually need to communicate with people if you want to do that. I know it sounds mind-blowing, like, really, Dan, if you want to get good at conversations, you have to have conversations. Who'd have guessed? Well, I'm an idiot and I didn't work it out straight away. All right. And yeah, I decided I needed a new plan of attack. And that led me to a new approach. This picture on the screen, by the way, is at a Japanese punk festival in Osaka, and a bunch of friends that I made while watching bands. And it's cool. So I really stepped out of my comfort zone at this point. I had the goal to communicate and connect with new people. So I started to do that. Now, what helped me the most? There's a few things that helped me on this little journey. One was I tried to listen to native speakers as much as humanly possible. If I was on the train, I would eavesdrop on the people next to me. If they're talking, I mean, Japanese trains are pretty quiet, but if I could hear a conversation, I was listening to that conversation, picking up words. Did I understand anything? Did I get keywords? What could I work out? I started watching Japanese TV, even though I don't like Japanese TV at all. I think it's weird and boring. Japanese TV is celebrities eating food and saying it's delicious. That's basically Japanese TV. It's proper boring. Anyway, I'd watch Japanese TV a lot. Podcasts, I'd listen to podcasts. I started following Japanese YouTubers and just listening. And I wasn't listening with the intent of, I need to understand every single word. I was listening with the intent of, I better try and get used to trying to catch some words here. I listened to it and, like, what words did I actually hear? And did I understand any of them words that I heard? And kind of building my tolerance to it. One of the biggest problems with English learners is they want everybody to speak slowly. And that don't work. Because if your textbooks and your teachers and the audio CD or MP3s that come with your textbook, if everybody speaks really slowly and clearly, when you rock up in Sheffield, you're not going to understand anybody because nobody speaks like that. So I think it's one of them things that you really have to bite the bullet and just start. Everything's difficult at first, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. So I decided, all right, I'm going to have to listen to loads of native speakers for a bit until I work it out. The other thing I worked out is I'm going to take every single possible bloody opportunity I can to try and speak to somebody. So what I would do, even though I were proper nervous and self-conscious and, or shitting myself, basically, for want of a better term, I would try and speak to people. Like every Friday after work, I would go to a standing bar. A standing bar in Japanese is called tachinomi, and basically it's a room that's maybe got 3 tables at chest height, and there's about 60 people in there all huddled around these tables, right? And I'd just go there, have a few beers, and what I would do is I'd like learn a new expression. And I'd go there and I'd say it to everyone just to see what they said. I said the same sentence about 100 times, but I heard 100 different responses and I picked up some new words and stuff. And that's one of the things that I started doing. Started going to gigs. I'm a big music fan. I love music. Any band that were playing near me, I went there and I started seeing the same faces and I tried to talk to people about bands I liked and, this kind of thing. Even, I went to the 7-Eleven on the way home from work and somebody stood outside smoking or having a beer or something. I'm going to try and say hello. And every chance I got, I tried to speak to people. I mean, they weren't very deep conversations. They weren't very good, but I tried. And I focused much more on, so when somebody said something to me, I didn't try and catch every single word. Because if you think about it in your own language, you do this too. I just picked out enough key words that I could work out what the bloody hell somebody is saying. Now, if they said something like, for example, in English, I'm going to shop you one out, that's very hard to understand. But I heard shop, all right, and I heard gonna, oh, he's going to the shop. Okay, I've got it. Like that thing. I started just trying to pick out the key words so I could understand the situation. I didn't need every word, just enough. And surprisingly, when you're just picking out keywords, you'll start to pick out more and more the more you do it. And when I didn't catch anything, I got over the fear of asking people, I'm sorry, mate, can you say that again? Mo ichido itte kudasai. And yeah, I think that was a big thing for me. Another thing that I had to learn very quick, I had very limited vocabulary. So I had to find ways to explain what I meant, even though I didn't know the word, right? For an example, in English, I could be like, oh, I need them things like it's like 2 knives together. You put your fingers in it and you can cut like paper, or a barber can cut your hair. Oh, Dan, you mean scissors? Yeah, I meant scissors. I couldn't remember the word scissors, but I told you using other words. I learned this skill in Japanese. And that helped me stop freezing in conversations, And yeah, I think like that's the thing. That was the new approach that I took. And I started to focus just on communicating. All I wanted to do was talk to people. I didn't care if my grammar was good. I didn't care if I knew exactly the right word. As long as I could deliver that message and I felt like I could talk to a person, that boosted my confidence so much more than, doing the fill in the gaps exercises or whatever it was. And I really focused more on, instead of trying to learn new stuff all the time, I'm just going to get better at using what I already knew. So learn to get good with what you've got is a big piece of advice I would give you as well. And yeah, it really taught me a lot of lessons. This is probably my first friends that I made in Japan. This is a couple called Ryo and Saori. And I met him in Akashi and they were weird and cool. I haven't spoken to them for a long time, but yeah, they were cool. They were interesting people. Anyway, so eventually through just trying, I got to a point where, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not quote unquote fluent in Japanese, right? But I'm confident enough to negotiate most of my daily life, real world situations quite comfortably. I can go to the tax office and talk to the tax people. I can go to the doctor. I can go to the city hall. I can do almost everything that I need to do. It's not easy, but I can do it. And I slowly but surely, I'm getting better. I don't really study anymore. I just do. And that's how I get better, right? So I didn't become perfect, but my goal was to communicate. you know? And that was really cool. And I think that the biggest thing I learned is that I was wrong about language learning. And at least I was wrong about my own language learning. And I think a lot of people make the same mistake. It's like you worry way too much about memorizing the language, and you don't worry anywhere near enough about actually using the bloody language. Okay? And I think that's probably the thing that made the biggest difference for me, that mind shift, that change of mindset. And, I started to make friends and, started to enjoy life in Japan, and everything became a bit easier. Started to feel part of a community. I didn't feel so lonely anymore. And I think that's really, really important. So the key takeaways from all of this is that it's not just rules and words, mate. If you're learning English because you're going to live in England, it's not just rules and words. It's, I understand it's difficult to communicate in English and you get stuck, and it's frustrating when you know the words but you can't find them, or you freeze up because you can't remember which grammar pattern to use. I understand it's hard. But it's not just rules and words. That's not what language is. It's more than that. And I think, it's very overwhelming when you first realize how big the problem is. It's such a big problem that it gets really overwhelming. And you've got to have a plan to deal with the overwhelm. So, yeah, I kind of made a strategy. I worked out what is my immediate goal and what am I going to do to get to it. And I didn't worry about academic Japanese because I didn't need it. So get rid of what you don't need and focus on what you do need. I learned this the hard way. Doing something is much better than knowing something when it comes to language. Knowing a grammar pattern's great, but using it is totally different. So do more than know. That's one big thing that I learned. I also learned that mistakes are good. I used to be terrified of making mistakes, but then I realized a mistake is a chance to learn. Sounds good. And this is a really big one. Perfection is not a thing. I used to think, I can just wait until my Japanese is good enough. It's never good enough, ever. And your English is the same. If you try and wait for it to be good enough, you'll be waiting forever, mate, because it's not a thing. Perfection is not a thing. The only thing perfection is, it's a lie that keeps you stuck. That's basically what perfection is. So the best piece of advice I can give you is stop trying to be perfect and just start trying. That's 100% the key to this. And now it's over to you. What is the most difficult thing about learning English for you? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, why don't you check out BritSpeak Mates, my brand new British English school community, where you get daily speaking challenges, you get feedback from me, and you can connect with other learners just like you, all for $19 a month. So check it out using the link in the description. And if you're still struggling with English, maybe you're making this mistake, so check it out now.